"You're coming with me. I need a daddy like you." That's what the little girl said, right there in the middle of the street. He's a rancher with no wife, no children, and a heart locked tighter than a bank vault. She's barefoot, half-starved, and carrying something men would kill to own. The dust hasn't even settled when whispers start. The orphan agent wants her gone. The cattle outfit wants her land. And the railroad, well, they'll burn what they can't buy. He swore he'd ride alone till his dying day. Now every mile of open prairie feels like a battlefield, and every pair of eyes in town is watching to see if he'll hand her over. In the hush after the church bell stops, one thing's clear. This isn't just about a rancher and a child. It's about land, blood, and a promise that could change everything west of the mountains. When the law says she's not his, and the fire comes in the night. Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers. The ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The summer heat shimmered off the dusty main street of Juniper, crossing like waves rising from hot metal. Elias Boone guided his horse past the general store's wooden facade, his worn boots creaking in the stirrups. The familiar sounds of the town, wagon wheels on packed earth, the blacksmith's hammer, and the distant whistle of an approaching train filled the air around him. He preferred the quiet solitude of his ranch-to-town visits, but supplies were running low. His practiced eyes took in the street scene, noting which merchants were open and plotting the quickest route to complete his errands. The sooner he could return to his land, the better. The touch came without warning, small fingers wrapping around his boot just as he was about to dismount. Elias looked down to find a pair of bright eyes staring up at him from a dirt-smudged face. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her dark hair tangled and her dress worn but carefully mended. "You're coming with me," she announced, her voice carrying clear and strong across the street. "I need a daddy like you." The usual bustle of the street died away. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A horse nickered nervously in the sudden quiet. Elias felt the weight of every eye in town turning toward him and the child. "Now see here," he started, trying to gently shake his boot free. But the girl's grip only tightened, her small fingers showing surprising strength. "Name's Mattie Crow," she said, chin lifted high, "and I picked you special." Elias swung down from his saddle, hoping to reason with her away from the growing crowd of onlookers. But as soon as his feet touched ground, she transferred her grip to his hand, holding on with the determination of a young burr. "Child, you can't just go claiming folks as family," he said quietly, trying to extract his fingers from her grasp. "Where are your people? Mama's gone." The words came out matter of fact, but Elias caught the slight tremor in her voice. 2 weeks now. Been staying at Ms. Turner's boarding house, doing chores for my keep." As if summoned by her name, the boarding house owner herself appeared on her porch steps. "That girl's been nothing but trouble," Mrs. Turner called out, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "Half wild, just like her mother was. I've sent word to the county orphan agent. He'll be here tomorrow to collect her." Mattie's fingers tightened around Elias's hand. He looked down at her again, seeing past the dirt to notice details he'd missed before. The careful patches in her dress, the proud set of her shoulders, the mix of Apache and white features in her young face. "My mama taught me good," Mattie said softly, for his ears alone. "I can cook and clean and tend chickens. And I learned quick. Anything you want to teach me." Something stirred in Elias's chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Here was this small scrap of humanity, bargaining for her future with such fierce dignity. He thought of his empty ranch house, of meals eaten in silence, of skills learned over a lifetime with no one to pass them on to. Mrs. Turner was already moving toward them, no doubt ready to separate child from stranger. But Mattie stood her ground, and Elias found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "She's with me." The words rang out across the now silent street. Mrs. Turner stopped short, her mouth falling open in surprise. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, some disapproving, some curious, all shocked by this turn of events. "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Turner sputtered. "You can't mean to take responsibility for this ... I said she's with me." His voice was quiet but carried the weight of certainty. "I'll settle her board bill, and we'll be getting her things now." A slight smile touched Maddie's lips, so brief anyone else might have missed it. But Elias saw it, and he recognized it for what it was, not triumph, but relief. She'd gambled everything on this moment, on him, and somehow she'd known she would win. As whispers continued to circulate through the watching townspeople, Maddie finally released his hand. But she stayed close to his side, her small shadow falling in line with his longer one on the dusty street. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged, even if everyone else was still catching up to that fact. The boarding house kitchen glowed warm in the evening light, its whitewashed walls reflecting the golden rays that filtered through cotton curtains. Elias watched as Maddie settled onto a wooden chair, her feet barely touching the plank floor. The rich aroma of beef stew filled the space. Between them, Mrs. Turner had grudgingly allowed them use of the kitchen after the other boarders had finished their meals. Now, the only sounds were the gentle clink of spoons against bowls and the distant twitter of sparrows settling in for the night. "Much obliged, sir," Maddie said softly before each careful spoonful, as if saying grace over and over. Her manners spoke of careful teaching, though her dress was worn thin. "Your mama taught you well," Elias observed, breaking the quiet. Maddie's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "She taught me everything important," she said. "How to cook, how to mend, how to read the weather." Her voice carried pride, but her eyes held shadows too deep for such a young face. "Tell me about her," Elias prompted gently. "And about your home." The girl straightened in her chair. "We had a little place," she said, "up in Shadow Valley. Not big, but good land with sweet water." Her face brightened as she described it. "Had chickens, a vegetable patch, even some fruit trees Mama planted when she first came." Elias's spoon stopped moving. Shadow Valley. He knew that place, and the troubles brewing there. The railroad baron, Preston Maxwell, had been eyeing that land for months, claiming right-of-way. And the Bighorn cattle outfit had been pushing their boundaries, trying to squeeze out smaller holders. "Mama knew they wanted our land," Maddie continued, as if reading his thoughts. "That's why she made sure I knew about the deed." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "It's wrapped in oilcloth, hidden under the loose board beneath the stairwell. She showed me special, said it was important to keep it safe." Elias nodded slowly, understanding growing. This child wasn't just seeking a protector, she was fighting to keep her inheritance. As dusk painted the sky in deep purples, Elias led Maddie to the livery stable. The familiar sense of hay and horse filled the dim interior. His bay gelding nickered softly in greeting. "This here's Thunder," Elias told her, watching as she fearlessly approached the horse's stall. "We'll ride him home tomorrow, if you're not afraid of horses." Maddie reached up to stroke Thunder's velvet nose. "Mama taught me about horses too," she said simply. Later that night, in his rented room above the saloon, Elias lay awake on the narrow bed. Moonlight slanted through the window, painting silver stripes across the rough floorboards. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, his wife, gone 5 years now to the consumption that had stolen her breath and left him alone. He'd grown used to the silence of his days, the empty chairs at his table, the hollow echo of his boots on the porch steps. He'd accepted loneliness as the price of survival. But now, a child's determined face floated in his memory, challenging that acceptance. Morning arrived clear and bright, the sky a deep western blue. Elias walked Maddie to the Mercantile, where old Mrs. Henderson helped them find a second-hand riding skirt that could be pinned to fit. The shopkeeper's eyes held questions, but she kept them to herself as she wrapped their purchases in brown paper. They collected Maddie's few belongings from the boarding house, a bundle so small it hurt Elias's heart to see it. 2 dresses, carefully folded, a hair ribbon, a small wooden horse worn smooth from handling, a Bible with pressed flowers between its pages. Thunder stood patient as Elias helped Maddie mount, showing her how to sit properly in her new skirt. He tied her bundle behind the saddle, then swung up behind her. As they rode slowly down the main street, heads turned. Farmers paused in their morning errands to stare. Elias felt Maddie's back straighten against his chest, proud and unflinching. Under their curious gazes, they passed the last buildings of Juniper Crossing, the morning sun warm on their backs. Ahead lay the open country, sage and grass stretching toward distant mountains. Somewhere in Shadow Valley waited a small homestead with fruit trees and a hidden deed, and a future neither of them had expected 24 hours ago. "You holding on all right?" Elias asked, feeling Maddie settle more comfortably against him. "Yes, sir," she replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "I knew you were the right one. I watched you 3 whole days before I spoke up." The admission surprised a chuckle from him. "That's so. Yes, sir. You looked lonely, just like me. And you looked kind." The morning sun climbed higher as Thunder's hooves kicked up soft dust along the wagon track. Elias felt Maddie shift behind him, adjusting to the side saddle position he'd shown her. The girl had taken to riding naturally, her small hands steady on the pommel. "That's Crow's Peak," Maddie said, pointing to a jagged mountain silhouette against the blue sky. "Mama said it looks like a bird's head." Her voice carried clear in the morning air, gaining confidence with each familiar sight. "That it does," Elias agreed, letting Thunder set an easy pace. "No need to rush with a child aboard. Do you have many cows at your ranch?" Maddie asked after a while, her voice smaller now, testing the waters of conversation. 20 head, Elias replied. "Plus some calves. Not as many as the big outfits, but enough to keep me busy." "I can help," she offered quickly. "I'm good with animals, and I can cook and clean, and—" "Let's just get there first," Elias said gently, hearing the worry beneath her words dot around midday. They came to Willow Creek, where clear water tumbled over smooth stones. Elias dismounted first then, helped Maddie down. Thunder lowered his head to drink while they settled in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Elias pulled a piece of jerky from his saddlebag, tore it in half, and handed the larger portion to Maddie. She took it with a quiet "thank you," chewing slowly. As her eyes scanned the surrounding hills, movement caught Elias's attention. Up on the western ridge, 3 riders sat their horses, dark silhouettes against the sky. Even at this distance, he recognized the stance of Bighorn Ranch hands. They watched for a long moment before wheeling their horses away, disappearing. Over the ridgeline, Maddie had seen them too. Her shoulders tensed and she stopped eating, the jerky forgotten in her hand. Elias noticed how she drew closer to his side, though she said nothing. The afternoon passed in quieter riding. The sun was painting the sky in amber and rose when they finally crested the last rise above Elias's ranch. Below them spread a modest spread, a weathered clapboard house with a front porch, a solid barn with fresh-patched roof, and a fenced chicken yard where white hens pecked at the dusty ground. "Home," Elias said simply, feeling Maddie lean forward. To see better, after stabling and feeding Thunder, Elias led Maddie into the house. Everything was plain but clean. A kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, a sitting room with a stone fireplace. He showed her to the spare room, which had stood empty since Sarah passed. The bed wore a faded quilt, and bare. Curtains hung at the window. "It ain't much," he started to say, but Maddie was already moving into the space, touching the quilt with gentle fingers. "It's perfect," she whispered. Before Elias could suggest she rest, Maddie was asking about evening chores. She followed him outside, insisting on helping. At the chicken coop, she gathered eggs with practiced hands, talking softly to the hens. When he went to pump water, she worked the handle alongside him, though it took all her weight to move it, inside. Elias stirred up a pot of beans and baked biscuits in the oven, skills he'd had to learn after Sarah died. Maddie set the table without being asked, placing the plates and forks just so. They ate by lamplight, the flames casting warm shadows on the walls. Maddie finished half her plate before setting down her fork, looking at Elias with serious eyes. "Ken, double quote she began, then stopped, gathering courage. Would it be all right if I called you Pa?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elias felt his throat tighten, memories of Sarah and their dreams of children rising unbidden. He couldn't find words, could only manage a small gesture toward her plate, encouraging her to eat more. After the dishes were done, Elias settled in his chair by the lamp. The family Bible lay heavy in his hands, its leather cover smooth with years of handling. Maddie sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, her face upturned and expectant. He opened to the Psalms, where Sarah had left a faded ribbon marker, and began to read in his deep, quiet voice. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The familiar words filled the room like music. When Elias glanced up a few verses later, he saw Maddie's eyes growing heavy, her head nodding slightly. The lamplight softened her features, making her look even younger than her 8 years. The scene was so peaceful, so right, it made his heart ache. But he kept reading, letting the ancient words of comfort wash over them both as night settled around the ranch house. The rooster's crow pierced the early morning stillness, making Maddie sit up straight in her new bed. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, warming the wooden floor. She pulled on her dress quickly, eager to prove herself useful on her first full day at the ranch. In the kitchen, Maddie stood on tiptoe to reach the iron skillet. She'd watched her mama cook eggs 100 times, but these slipped and slid across the hot surface, shells mixing with whites. The yolks broke, spreading yellow across the pan in a messy scramble. A deep chuckle from the doorway made her turn. Elias stood there, his usual stern expression softened by something that might have been a smile. "Been a while since I heard that sound," he said, moving to help her. "Here, let me show you how Mama taught me." His large hands guided hers on the spatula, demonstrating how to flip the eggs without breaking them. Together they salvaged breakfast, though some bits were crunchier than others. After the dishes were done, Elias led Maddie to the barn where he gathered tools for fence mending. "North pasture needs attention," he explained, loading wire and pliers into a canvas bag. "Might as well learn the trade if you're staying on." The morning sun grew warm as they walked the fence line. Elias showed Maddie how to test the wires. Tension, pointing out weak spots where cattle had pushed through. "Like this," he demonstrated, carefully coiling a length of fresh wire. "Keep your fingers tucked, or it'll bite worse than any snake." Maddie watched intently, then tried herself. Her first attempts twisted wrong, but Elias was patient. "Better," he nodded when she finally got it right. "You've got steady hands." Around midday, hoofbeats approached from the south. A woman rode toward them on a baymar, her dark skirt arranged neatly for riding. A covered basket hung from her saddle horn. "Clara Jensen," Elias explained quietly to Maddie. "Our nearest neighbor. Good woman." Clara reined in her horse, studying Maddie with kind eyes. "So the talk in town is true," she said, dismounting smoothly. "I brought pie. Thought you might want something sweet with your dinner." She smiled at Maddie. "Apple and cinnamon. My mother's recipe." Inside the house, Clara moved naturally around the kitchen, finding cups and heating coffee on the stove. She set out 3 plates and cut generous slices of pie, making sure Maddie got the biggest piece. While Maddie ate at the table, Clara drew Elias aside. Her voice dropped low, though her words still carried. "Elias, you need to know. That orphan, Agent Matthews, he's in deep with the Big Horn outfit. Takes their money regular, placing children where they want them." Elias's jaw tightened. "What are you saying? If they learn about her mother being Apache, about that valley land she's heir to..." Clara glanced at Maddie. "They'll move fast. Claim she needs proper care in their approved home. You know how it goes." The kitchen fell quiet, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Maddie kept her eyes on her plate, but her fork had stopped moving. After Clara rode away, Elias took Maddie to the barn. "Someone you should meet," he said, leading her to a stall where a large draft mare stood quietly. The horse's coat gleamed like copper in the filtered light. "This here's Belle," Elias said, letting Maddie stroke the mare's soft nose. "Gentlest creature on 4 legs. She pulls the wagon when I need to haul supplies." He lifted Maddie onto the wagon seat where she sat tall, pretending to hold reins. "Mama told me about driving wagon," she said. "Said ladies need to know how." "Your Mama was right about that," Elias agreed. "Maybe tomorrow we'll hitch Belle up, take a short ride. Show you how it's done proper." They stayed in the barn until the sun began to set, Elias pointing out tools and tack, Maddie soaking up every detail. When they finally stepped outside, stars were beginning to shine in the darkening sky. A cool evening breeze carried the scent of sage, and distant rain. The lamplight through the house windows looked different now. Warmer somehow, more welcoming than it had in years. Maddie's small boots kicked up dust beside Elias's longer stride as they walked back together. Looking down at her dark head, Elias felt something shift in his chest. Clara's warning about the orphan agent echoed in his mind. He'd have to be careful. Be ready. This child had chosen him, trusted him. He couldn't let her down. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Elias hitched Belle to the wagon. The morning air held a hint of fall, though summer still claimed the land. He'd spent half the night planning this journey, knowing they needed allies who could speak for Maddie's rights. Maddie emerged from the house wearing her best dress, her dark hair neatly braided and tied with a blue ribbon Clara Jensen had found in her sewing basket the day before. She climbed onto the wagon seat with practiced ease, smoothing her skirt as she settled beside Elias. "It's a fair piece to the agency," Elias explained, gathering the reins. "We'll need to make good time." Belle's hooves kicked up dust as they set out, the wagon wheels creaking a steady rhythm along the rutted trail. The morning warmed quickly. They passed scattered homesteads and grazing cattle, Maddie pointing out hawks circling overhead. Near midday, they approached Willow Creek, where the trail dipped down to a narrow crossing. An army supply wagon blocked their path, 4 mules straining to pull the heavy load up the creek bank. Elias reined Belle to a stop, letting Maddie sip from their water jug while they waited. The soldiers nodded curtly as they passed, their wagon loaded with crates and barrels bound for the fort. After crossing the creek, they shared a simple lunch of bread and dried beef in the shade of a cottonwood. Maddie's questions about the agency grew more frequent as the afternoon wore on. "Will they know about Mama?" she asked, twisting the ribbon between her fingers. "That's what we aim to find out," Elias answered, keeping his voice steady despite his own uncertainty. The agency building came into view as the sun began its westward slide, a weathered wooden structure with a tin roof that flashed in the afternoon light. A few horses stood tied to the hitching rail, and smoke rose from the chimney despite the warm day. Inside, Clerk James Barlow barely looked up from his ledger, his pen scratching across paper as they waited. When he finally acknowledged them, his manner was cool and formal. "State your business," he said, eyeing Maddie with obvious disapproval. "Need to speak with someone about Sarah Crow's people," Elias said firmly. "Her daughter here has land rights that need protecting." Barlow's lips thinned. But before he could respond, a deep voice spoke from the doorway. I knew Sarah Crow. An older man stood there, his silver hair caught back with a leather tie, his bearing dignified despite plain clothes. Deep lines marked his face, speaking of both wisdom and hardship. I am Nokos, he said, moving into the room with measured steps. His English was clear and precise. Sarah was my sister's friend. We mourned when word came of her passing. Maddie straightened beside Elias, her eyes fixed on Nokos. The elder spoke to her softly in Apache, words Elias couldn't understand. But they brought the first real smile he'd seen to Maddie's face since she'd found him in town. Nokos led them to a small room behind the main office where maps covered one wall and afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows. He listened intently as Elias explained how Maddie had chosen him, how he aimed to protect her inheritance. The law of paper and ink has its place, Nokos said finally, but it is not enough. To be this child's guardian means more than marking documents. He fixed Elias with a penetrating gaze. It means honoring her mother's people, teaching her our ways alongside yours. Sarah wanted this for her daughter, to walk proud in both worlds. Elias nodded slowly, feeling the weight of this new responsibility. I reckon I've got a lot to learn, he admitted. Yes, Nokos agreed. But there was approval in his slight smile, and that is a good beginning. They left the agency as shadows lengthened across the land. With too many miles left to make home before dark, Elias chose a sheltered spot near a spring to make camp. He built a small fire while Maddie helped gather dry wood, moving surely in the growing dusk. After a supper of beans warmed in the coals, Maddie curled up in a blanket near the fire. The sound of crickets filled the cooling air, and stars began to prick through the darkening sky. Soon her breathing deepened into sleep, her face peaceful in the firelight. Elias sat wrapped in his own blanket, rifle across his knees, watching the night deepen around their small camp. Nokosi's words echoed in his mind as he studied the sleeping child. She looked so small, yet she carried the weight of two worlds in her young heart. He would have to find the strength to help her carry that weight, to learn what he needed to know to guide her true dot above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had watched over generations of both their peoples. Elias settled in for his vigil, determined to keep her safe through the long night ahead. Bell's hooves drummed, a steady rhythm on the packed earth as Elias guided the wagon home through the morning light. The sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when the ranch came into view, the weathered wood of the barn glowing golden in the early rays. Maddie sat up straighter on the wagon seat, her eyes bright despite their night under the stars, the moment Elias brought the wagon to a halt. In the yard, Maddie hopped down, her skirt swishing as she made straight for the chicken coop. I'll check on them, she called over her shoulder, already lifting the rough wooden latch. Elias couldn't help but smile as he unhitched Belle, listening to Maddie's quiet clucking sounds as she gathered eggs. The chickens had taken to her right quick, same as everything else on the ranch seemed to. 7 eggs, Maddie announced proudly, emerging from the coop with her apron carefully bundled. I counted twice to make sure. She carried them to the kitchen like they were pure gold, setting each one gently in the wooden bowl on the shelf. The barn roof needed attention, had for weeks now, and the clear weather made it a good day. Before repairs, Elias gathered his tools while Maddie trailed behind him, eager to help. He set up the ladder against the weathered boards and climbed up with a handful of shingles. Hand me them nails, would you? He called down. Maddie proved herself a capable helper, passing up nails one at a time and warning him whenever his hammer strayed too close to his thumb. The morning passed in comfortable quiet, broken only by the steady rhythm of hammering and the distant lowing of cattle. The sun had passed its peak when hoofbeats approached from the main road. Elias straightened up, shading his eyes against the glare. A rider approached at an easy lope, dust rising behind him. The man's clothes were trail-worn, but the silver conkos on his saddle and the quality of his mount marked him as one of the cattle outfit's men. "Afternoon," the rider called up, touching the brim of his hat. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we have a word?" Elias climbed down slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. He gestured for Maddie to stay by the barn, but she edged closer. Her small face set in determination. "Thought you might want to know," the rider said, his voice friendly enough but carrying an edge like a hidden knife. "That valley property the girl claims? It'll be under our fence by month's end. Unless, of course, she's willing to sign it over proper-like. Save everyone a heap of trouble." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "That land's got a legal deed," he said. "Quietly, in Maddie's name." The rider's smile turned to a smirk. "Deeds can get mighty complicated when it comes to certain situations. Might be better for all concerned if the girl took a fair offer now." He adjusted his reins meaningfully. "While it's still being offered friendly-like. We ain't selling," Elias said firmly, moving to stand between the rider and Maddie. The man's smirk never wavered as he turned his horse. "Have it your way," he called over his shoulder as he rode off. "Don't say you weren't warned." The afternoon shadows were lengthening when Clara Jensen arrived, her arms full of baking supplies. "Thought we might make some proper biscuits," she announced, shooing them both into the kitchen. Soon the small room filled with the warm scent of flour and butter as Clara showed Maddie how to cut the dough just so. "Like this?" Maddie asked, her face scrunched in concentration as she pressed the tin cup into the flattened dough. "Perfect," Clara praised, then laughed as Maddie blew a stray bit of flour from her nose, sending white puffs into her dark hair. Soon Maddie was giggling too, the tension from earlier melting away like butter on a hot biscuit. The kitchen grew warm and cozy as the biscuits baked, rain clouds gathering outside. They sat down to supper just as the first drops began to fall, the fresh biscuits steaming alongside beans and late summer vegetables from Clara's garden. After the dishes were cleared, Elias reached for the family Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. He opened to the Psalms, his voice steady as he read words of comfort and strength. Maddie sat with her chin propped in her hands, listening intently, while Clara worked on her mending by lamplight. The soft patter of rain on the roof accompanied Elias's words, a gentle counterpoint to the ancient verses. The lamp cast warm shadows on the walls, and for a moment, the room felt like a sanctuary against the gathering dark outside. When Clara finally gathered her things to leave, the rain had settled into a steady rhythm. Maddie helped wrap the leftover biscuits in a clean cloth, insisting Clara take them home. The night drew close around the little house, but inside, the warmth lingered. Morning sunlight pierced the clouds, turning puddles in the yard to mirrors. Elias stood on the porch, steam rising from his coffee cup as he studied the clearing sky. His mind worked over the cattle outfit's threat, turning it like a stone in his hand. They had to stake their claim on Maddie's valley before someone else did. Inside, he heard Maddie humming as she swept the kitchen floor. The sound made something in his chest tighten. How quick she was to make herself useful, to prove she belonged. He set his cup down and went to gather supplies. "We're going to see your mother's land today," he announced, filling canteens at the pump. "Need to measure where we'll put fence posts." Maddie's face lit up. "Can I come, please?" She gripped the broom handle tight. "I know where Mama kept the corner markers." Elias nodded, already packing burlap bags with tools. "Get your hat. We'll make a day of it." While Maddie rushed to get ready, he wrapped thick slices of bread with cheese and dried beef. He added 2 apples from the barrel in the root cellar, tucking everything into his saddlebags along with the measuring rope and his notebook. The sun had climbed higher when they set out, Maddie riding behind him on the saddle. She sat straight and proud, pointing out familiar landmarks as they crossed the open range. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its shadow dancing across the grass. "Mama always said that hawk meant good luck," Maddie said softly. She learned it from her people. They rode steadily through the morning, stopping at noon to water the horse at a shallow creek. Elias shared out the sandwiches while Maddie dipped her toes in the cool water, giggling when minnows darted around her feet. The afternoon sun was slanting when they crested a low rise, and there it was, the valley spread out below them like a green jewel. A creek wound through stands of cottonwood trees, their leaves shimmering silver in the breeze. The grass grew thick and sweet, rippling in waves across the bottomland. "It's just like I remembered," Maddie breathed. She slid down from the saddle before Elias could help her, running down the slope with her arms spread wide. The tall grass parted around her like water. "This is ours," she called out, twirling in circles until she fell laughing into the grass. "Our valley, Pa." Elias's throat tightened at the word Pa, but he kept his voice steady. "Show me where your mama marked the corners." Maddie led him to stone cairns at each corner of the property, carefully hidden under brush. Elias made notes in his book, measuring distances with the rope while Maddie held the other end. The land was even better than he'd imagined. Rich soil, year-round water, good grazing. No wonder the cattle outfit wanted it. "We'll need about 40 posts to start," he muttered, making calculations. "Maybe more once we get to that rocky stretch." He looked up to find Maddie watching him intently. "I can help dig post holes," she offered. "Mama taught me to use a shovel proper." "Reckon you can," he said, and her smile could have lit up the darkening sky. They packed up as the sun touched the western hills, casting long shadows across the valley. Elias helped Maddie back into the saddle, taking one last look at the land they needed to protect. Something caught his eye, a thin column of smoke rising far to the north. "That's not our place," Maddie said quickly, reading his worried look. "Our chimney smoke doesn't go that high." "No," Elias agreed, "but we'd best head home anyway." He turned the horse toward home, keeping one eye on that distant smoke as they rode. It was too far to be their ranch, but it sat uneasy in his mind. Nonetheless, dot stars were pricking through the twilight when they finally reached the ranch. Both were too tired to cook, so they made do with bread and cheese at the kitchen table. Maddie's eyes kept closing as she chewed. "Time for bed," Elias said gently, gathering the plates. "Been a long day." Maddie nodded sleepily but paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Thank you for taking me to see our valley," she said, then darted up to her room before he could respond. Elias stood in the quiet kitchen, hearing the creak of floorboards above as Maddie got ready for bed. "Our valley," she'd said. He thought of her running through the grass, claiming that beautiful land as their own. His resolve hardened like iron. Whatever it took, he'd make sure she kept what was rightfully hers. He checked the doors one last time, then climbed the stairs to his own bed, bone-weary but determined. Tomorrow they'd start planning the fence in earnest. Morning brought a chill wind that set the windmill creaking. Elias saddled his horse early, checking the cinch twice before mounting. He needed strong backs to help with the fencing, and the livery stable usually knew who was looking for work. "You'll stay with Clara today," he told Maddie, who stood on the porch wrapped in a shawl. "Mind what she tells you." Maddie nodded solemnly. "I will. Promise you'll be back before dark?" "Promise." He touched the brim of his hat and rode out, watching from the corner of his eye as Clara welcomed Maddie into her house next door. The ride to town took longer than usual, the wind fighting him all the way. By the time he reached Juniper Crossing's main street, dust devils were dancing between the buildings. He tied his horse outside the livery, the familiar smells of hay and leather greeting him as he stepped inside. The stable master, Tom Wheeler, looked up from mending a bridle. "Morning, Boone. Need feed already?" "Need hands," Elias replied. "Got fencing to do, 40 posts or more. Know anybody reliable?" Tom scratched his chin. "Mitchell Brothers might be free. They did good work on the church fence last month. He was about to say more when voices drifted in from the street, one sharp and official, the other heavy with authority. Elias moved quietly to the stable door, recognizing Henry Colby's precise tone. The orphan agent stood with Sheriff Hanks near the jail, their heads bent close in conversation. "The girl can't stay there," Colby was saying. "It's not proper, and you know what trouble it'll bring when word gets out about her background." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Boone's a decent man. Keeps to himself. Exactly why he's unfit to raise a child." Colby's voice turned colder. "We need to remove her before this situation gets out of hand. I have a family lined up in Carson City, respectable people who can give her a proper upbringing." Something fierce and protective rose in Elias's chest. Before he could think better of it, he stepped out onto the street. "That girl's not going anywhere." Both men turned, startled. Colby recovered first, his thin face settling into practice. "Calm, Mr. Boone. We were just discussing your situation." "Heard plenty," Elias said, moving closer. "Maddie stays with me. She chose me fair and square." "A child can't choose her guardian," Colby replied smoothly. "The law provides for proper placement of orphans. Surely you understand we must consider what's best for her future." "What's best is keeping her on her mother's land," Elias growled, "with someone who'll respect both sides of her heritage." The sheriff looked away, but Colby's smile only grew colder. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that. Good day, Mr. Boone." He turned and walked away, his boots clicking precisely on the wooden sidewalk. Elias stood there, fists clenched, until the sheriff cleared his throat. "Best watch yourself, Boone. Colby's got friends in high places." "So does the truth," Elias replied, and strode back to the livery to finish his business. He arranged for the Mitchell brothers to start work the next week, then rode home with his mind churning like a storm-tossed river. The sun was already sliding toward the horizon when he reached Clara's small house. The sound of laughter drew him around to the barn, where he found Maddie and Clara by the cow pen. Maddie's face was flushed with pride as she held up a jar of cream. "Look what I helped make," she called out. "Clara showed me how to milk Bessie, and we separated the cream all by ourselves." "That's so." Elias couldn't help smiling at her excitement. "Reckon we'll have butter soon?" "Clara says I can come back tomorrow and learn." Maddie hugged the jar carefully. "Can I, Pa?" "Please?" The word Pa still caught him by surprise, but it felt right somehow. "We'll see. Right now we'd best get home before dark." Clara touched his arm as Maddie ran to get her shawl. "I heard about Colby," she said quietly. "That man's got ice where his heart should be. You watch out for her." Elias nodded grimly. "Plan to." The ride home was quiet, Maddie sitting in front of him this time, cradling her jar of cream. She leaned back against his chest as they rode, her small body growing heavier as she fought sleep. "You did good work today," he told her softly. HMM, she mumbled. "Like helping. After putting her to bed, Elias sat at the kitchen table long into the night. The lamp cast yellow light on papers spread before him. Property maps, legal documents, his notebook full of calculations. He had to find a way to protect both Maddie and her land. The orphan agent's threats hung in the air like storm clouds. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving only the soft tick of cooling stovepipes and the distant cry of a coyote. Elias dipped his pen in ink and began to write, planning their next move by the steady light of the lamp. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Elias looked up from feeding the chickens, while Maddie paused with her egg basket half full. A rider on a lathered horse pulled up hard at the gate. "Telegram for Elias Boone." The boy called out, waving a yellow paper. "Urgent from Silver Creek." Elias wiped his hands on his shirt and took the message, pressing a nickel into the boy's palm. As he read, his jaw tightened. Maddie crept closer, her small face pinched with worry. "What is it?" she asked, clutching her basket. "News from my friend Thomas at the Silver Creek Land Office." Elias folded the paper carefully. "The railroad baron Mitchell Edwards has filed papers saying your mama's deed ain't valid." Maddie's eyes widened. "But it is. Mama showed me the stamp and everything. I know, little one." Elias looked toward town, his mind already working. "Reckon we need to see a lawyer about this. Best finish gathering those eggs. We can sell them in town while we're there." They worked quickly, Maddie counting each egg twice before nestling them in straw. Elias hitched the wagon, checking the traces with extra care. The morning had grown warm by the time they set out, dust rising behind the wheels as they followed the rutted road to Juniper Crossing. Maddie sat straight beside him on the wagon seat, her legs swinging. "Will the lawyer help us?" "That's what lawyers are for," Elias said, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. The town only had one lawyer, Herbert Wallace, and Elias had never had cause to visit him before. They stopped first at the Mercantile, where Mrs. Peterson counted out their egg money carefully. "Fresh as always," she said, smiling at Maddie. "You must be taking good care of those hens." "Yes, ma'am," Maddie replied proudly. "I talk to them every morning." The lawyer's office sat above the bank, its window lettered in gold paint. Inside, the air smelled of leather-bound books and pipe tobacco. Herbert Wallace proved to be a round man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He studied Maddie's mother's deed while they waited in straight-back chairs. "The deed itself is perfectly valid," Wallace said finally, adjusting his glasses. "Properly registered and stamped. But that's not your real problem." He looked at Elias directly. "The railroad will challenge your guardianship first. Without legal standing as the girl's guardian, you can't defend her property rights." Maddie's hand found Elias's and squeezed tight. "He is my guardian," she said firmly. "I chose him myself." Wallace's expression softened. "I can see that, young lady. But the law has certain requirements. We'll need witness statements, character references, proof you can provide proper care and education." He shuffled through some papers. "And there's the matter of your heritage to consider. Some judges have particular views about mixed race children. Her heritage ain't up for discussion," Elias said, his voice hard as iron. "What do we need to do first?" They spent an hour going over paperwork, Maddie drawing quietly with a pencil Wallace gave her. The sun was high when they finally stepped out onto the boardwalk, their heads full of legal terms and deadlines. "Hungry?" Elias asked, and Maddie nodded. They shared a simple lunch of cheese and apples in the wagon, watching townsfolk pass by. They were nearly home when they came upon Joe Miller's wagon, stuck axle-deep in mud from yesterday's rain. The farmer was red-faced from exertion, his team straining against the weight. "Need a hand?" Elias called, pulling their wagon to a stop. "Much obliged," Miller panted. Got her in deeper, trying to rock her out. Elias climbed down, assessing the situation. "Maddie, hand me that length of rope from behind the seat. And the long pry bar." Maddie moved like she'd been helping with ranch work all her life, passing tools without being asked twice. She held the reins of both teams while Elias and Miller worked, speaking softly to the horses when they grew restless. The sun was dropping toward the horizon by the time they freed Miller's wagon. The farmer shook Elias's hand warmly. "Don't know what I'd have done without you folks. Say, I heard about that railroad business. My wife and we'd be happy to write a letter about your girl there, seeing how good you are with her." "Thank you," Elias said simply. That would help. The last rays of sunlight painted the sky orange as they pulled into their yard. Maddie was quiet, tired, but somehow more settled than she'd been that morning. "You did fine work today," Elias told her as they unhitched the horses. "Handled yourself like a true ranch hand." She smiled up at him, dust streaking her cheeks. We're going to win, aren't we? Keep our land? Elias looked at her small, determined face and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. Yes, he said. We surely are. The summer days stretched long and bright as Elias and Maddie settled into their routine. Each morning brought new tasks, stringing wire for the valley fence, gathering papers for the lawyer, and tending to endless ranch chores. Maddie proved herself capable with every passing day, learning to mend tears in flour sacks and keep the kitchen swept clean. One particularly hot afternoon, Clara Jensen's buggy rattled into the yard just as Maddie finished feeding the chickens. The neighbor's face was drawn tight with worry as she climbed down, her usually neat hair wisping loose beneath her bonnet. Elias, she called, catching him as he emerged from the barn. I need to speak with you, privately. Maddie hung back near the chicken coop, pretending not to listen as Clara lowered her voice, but the words carried clearly in the still air. The cattle outfit lost 6 steers 2 nights ago. Cut right from the herd in the dark. Clara twisted her hands in her apron. They're spreading talk in town, ... horrible talk. Saying that girl of yours must have Apache kin helping her steal, trying to drive honest folks out. Elias's face darkened like a thundercloud. Without a word, he strode to the barn and saddled his horse, pausing only to tell Maddie, Stay here with Clara. I won't be long. As hoofbeats faded down the road, Maddie returned to her chores, gathering warm eggs in her basket. To keep her mind off the worried looks Clara kept casting her way, she hummed the hymn her mother had taught her. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. The sun hung low and red when Elias finally returned. His shoulders were tight with anger, but his voice was gentle as he dismounted. Come on inside, Maddie. Time for supper. In the kitchen, he built up the fire while Maddie set out plates. The familiar routine felt comforting after the day's tensions. They had no call to say such things, Elias said quietly, breaking cornbread into his coffee. I told them straight, you're here with me every night, helping with chores and learning. Your letters. Truth will show itself in time. Maddie nodded, stirring her own coffee carefully. Mama always said truth was like water. It finds its way out no matter what. Your mama was wise. Elias managed a small smile. We'll weather this storm together. The old clock on the mantel ticked steadily as they finished their simple meal, each lost in thought. Outside, a whippoorwill called once, twice, then fell silent as darkness settled over the ranch. 2 days after the ugly rumors began spreading, Elias saddled his horse before dawn. The morning air held a hint of fall Christmas as he prepared for the ride to check the valley fence progress. Mind Clara while I'm gone, he told Maddie, who stood on the porch in her faded calico dress. I'll be back before supper. Clara arrived shortly after, basket of mending in hand. She and Maddie settled into a quiet rhythm of work sorting beans, hanging wash, and checking on the chickens. The afternoon sun beat down hot and steady. Around 3 o'clock, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Clara's teenage son Timothy reined his lathered horse to a stop, face streaked with dust and worry. Ma, there's smoke rising from the ranch lots. Of it, Clara dropped her mending. Maddie, come quick. They piled into Clara's wagon, Timothy riding ahead to guide them. As they crested the last rise, black smoke billowed against the blue sky. The barn was engulfed in flames. Clara found Maddie inside the barn, trying to free the horses. Thick smoke filled the air. Out now. Clara grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her clear, just as a burning beam crashed down behind them. They stumbled into the yard, both coughing. Maddie's face was smudged with soot, but she was unhurt. They could only watch helplessly as the flames devoured the barn. Elias galloped in just as the roof collapsed with a mighty crash, sending sparks spiraling skyward. He leaped from his horse, face ashen. Maddie, she's safe, Clara called. I got her out in time. That night, they sat in the darkened kitchen. The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, seeping through every crack. Maddie picked at a plate of cold biscuits while Elias stared into his coffee cup, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. A sharp knock broke the silence. Sheriff Hank stood on the porch, holding a sheaf of official papers. His face was grim in the lamplight. "Sorry to disturb you, Elias, especially after today's trouble. But I've got papers here ordering the girl into protective custody until this guardianship matter's settled." He shifted uncomfortably. "For her own safety, they say." Elias's hand tightened on the doorframe. "When?" "You've got till morning." The sheriff wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'll be back at first light." Maddie pressed close to Elias's side as the sheriff's boots clumped down the porch steps. Neither spoke as the night deepened around them, the embers of their barn still glowing red in the darkness. The kitchen clock ticked away the long night hours as Elias sat at the worn table, his mother's Bible open before him. The lamp cast a dim circle of light across the weathered pages. His calloused fingers traced familiar verses, seeking comfort in their well-worn wisdom. Maddie had dragged her quilt from her bed, settling stubbornly beside the iron stove. Every time Elias suggested she go to her room, she shook her head. "Can't sleep without knowing you're near, Pa," she whispered. The word Pa caught in his throat like a prayer. The night seemed endless, broken only by the occasional pop of cooling embers from the ruined barn. Elias's mind churned with worry, but his heart kept returning to the small figure curled up in the quilt, trusting him to make things right. First light crept pale across the floorboards. Maddie stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Without a word, she disappeared upstairs, returning in her best dress, the blue calico Clara had helped her mend. Her dark hair was neatly braided, tied with a fresh ribbon. Hoofbeats approached as the sun cleared the horizon. Clara rode up first, her wagon loaded with breakfast biscuits still warm from her oven. Behind her came Nokos, his silver hair gleaming in the morning light, mounted on a sturdy paint horse. More neighbors followed, the Hansons from the creek farm, old Jim Taylor who'd lost his own daughter years ago, and 3 families from the church congregation. "We're riding with you," Clara announced, passing out biscuits wrapped in clean cloth. "That judge needs to see you're not standing alone." Nokos dismounted with dignity, his presence lending gravity to their gathering. "The agency will speak for the child's rights," he said, placing a gentle hand on Maddie's shoulder. "Her mother's people have not forgotten." They formed a small procession heading toward town wagons, riders, and Elias's buggy leading the way. Maddie sat straight beside him, her small hand occasionally touching the pocket where he kept her mother's deed. The morning air hung heavy with tension and the promise of another scorching day. Elias gripped the reins, feeling the paper crackle in his pocket with each bump of the road. In his other pocket, a letter from the agency and character statements from his neighbors pressed against his heart. Everything they had gathered, every scrap of proof that he could give Maddie the home she deserved, would be tested today. The small caravan moved steadily toward Juniper Crossing, dust rising behind their wheels. Maddie hummed softly a hymn her mother had taught her while ahead. The town's church spire rose against the morning sky. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as townspeople packed the wooden benches. Morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting bars of light across the worn floorboards. Elias sat at the front with Maddie, her small hand gripping his sleeve. The familiar scent of wood polish and leather-bound books filled the stuffy room. Henry Colby, the orphan agent, stood before the judge's bench in his pressed suit. His voice carried sharp and clear through the chamber. "Your Honor, we must consider what's best for the child. Mr. Boone has no blood relation to her whatsoever." He gestured toward Maddie with a practiced sweep of his arm. "And given her mixed heritage, surely a proper institution would better serve her needs." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara Jensen, sitting directly behind them, reached forward to squeeze Maddie's shoulder. The touch seemed to straighten the girl's spine. "Furthermore," Colby continued. Allowing an unmarried rancher to raise a young girl of questionable background sets a dangerous precedent. The territory has established procedures for cases like these. The judge, a silver-haired man named Harrison, peered over his spectacles at Maddie. His weathered face revealed nothing. When Elias stood, his chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. He placed one hand on the wooden rail before him, his voice low but steady. "Your Honor, I stand here today because this child chose me." He glanced down at Maddie, whose dark eyes never left his face. "She saw something in me I'd forgotten was there." The ability to be a father again. The courthouse grew still. Even the restless shuffling of feet ceased. "I may not share her blood, but I share her heart. Every morning she helps with chores without being asked. Every evening she reads from my mother's Bible, stumbling over the big words, but never giving up." Elias's voice grew stronger. "She is my daughter by choice and by promise, and I aim to keep that promise until my dying day." Nokos rose from his place near the wall, his dignified bearing drawing all eyes. He approached the bench, removing a folded document from his vest pocket. "If it pleases the court," he said, his English precise and measured, "I present Article 7 of the Treaty of 1873. He handed the paper to the judge. "This clause specifically protects the land rights of children born to tribal mothers. Maddie Crow's claim to her mother's homestead is protected by federal law." Judge Harrison studied the document, his fingers tracing the lines of text. The room held its breath. Minutes stretched like hours as he considered, the tick of the courthouse clock marking each moment. Finally, he set the paper down and removed his spectacles. The law serves justice, but it must also serve wisdom. His eyes moved from Elias to Maddie, then to the crowded room. "I see before me a child who has found a home, and a man who has found his purpose in protecting her. The treaty rights are clear. More than that, the evidence of genuine care and community support is overwhelming." He lifted his gavel. "I hereby grant guardianship of Madison Crow to Elias Boone, with all rights and responsibilities therein. Furthermore, her claim to the Valley homestead is affirmed under treaty protection." The gavel struck with finality. The courthouse erupted in cheers. Maddie launched herself into Elias's arms, nearly knocking him backward. He caught her, holding her tight as tears streaked down both their faces. Clara wrapped them both in a fierce embrace, while Nokos nodded in quiet approval. They spilled out into the bright afternoon sunlight, surrounded by well-wishers. Clara reached into her saddlebag with a knowing smile, pulling out a cloth-wrapped pie still warm from her oven. "Apple and cinnamon," she said, cutting a generous slice for Maddie. "Every victory needs something sweet to seal it." Maddie took the pie with both hands, her smile brighter than the summer sky. Elias watched her share bites with the other children who'd come to witness the hearing, her laughter mixing with theirs in the dusty street. All around them, neighbors offered handshakes and congratulations. The shadow of fear that had haunted them these past weeks lifted like morning mist, leaving behind the clear certainty of belonging. The evening sun painted long shadows across Elias's ranch as wagons rolled into the yard, loaded with fresh cut timber and willing hands. Neighbors who had stood with them in court now came bearing tools and determination to rebuild the burned barn. The air hummed with purpose and fellowship. Men gathered in clusters, discussing plans and measurements while their wives set up tables laden with food near the house. The scent of coffee mingled with sawdust and evening sage. Already, the charred remains had been cleared away, and new post holes marked the ground like promises of renewal. Maddie darted between the workers, her dark braids swinging as she carried a water bucket and tin dipper. Her court dress had been exchanged for a work apron, and dirt smudged her cheeks, but her eyes sparkled with joy. As she moved among the men, offering drinks, she hummed the hymn her mother had taught her, the melody rising sweet and clear in the cooling air. Much obliged, Miss Mattie, Tom Jensen said, accepting a dipperful. He winked at her. Reckon you're the finest water girl this ranch has ever seen. Only water girl, she corrected with a grin, then hurried off to refill her bucket at the pump. Elias watched her from where he worked, setting posts with 3 other ranchers. Pride swelled in his chest at how naturally she took to caring for others, just as her mother must have done. The thought of Sarah Crow brought a moment of reverence. He silently promised her spirit that her daughter would know both her Apache heritage and the love of this community that had finally chosen to stand with them. As twilight softened the sky to purple, lanterns began to glow around the worksite. Clara Jensen organized the women in serving a hearty supper of beans, cornbread, and 3 kinds of pie. The workers gathered gratefully, passing plates and sharing the day's victory story for those who hadn't been in town. When the meal was done and the last of the day's work finished, most of the neighbors headed home, promising to return tomorrow. The sound of wagon wheels and hoofbeats faded into the gathering dark, leaving behind the frame of what would become a stronger barn than the one they'd lost. Inside the ranch house, lamplight cast a warm glow through the kitchen windows. Elias and Mattie knelt together beside her mother's Bible, their shadows tall against the wall. His deep voice carried the words of thanksgiving, rough with emotion. Lord, we thank you for your protection through these trials, for friends who stand beside us, for justice that prevails, and for making us a family in your sight. Amen. Amen, Mattie echoed softly, her small hand still clasped in his larger one. Nokos, who had stayed behind, sat at the kitchen table with quiet dignity. He spoke in Apache, the words flowing like water, then translated. The old ones say that family is not only in the blood, but in the heart that chooses to love. I will teach you your mother's tongue, little one, and the ways of her people. This is also your inheritance. Mattie's face glowed with wonder. I'd like that very much, grandfather. Clara bustled in from the back porch, carrying a fresh-baked apple pie. Steam curled invitingly from the golden crust as she set it on the table. There's nothing that feeds the soul quite like watching good people come together, she said, cutting generous slices for everyone. They sat in comfortable silence, savoring the warm pie and the peace of belonging. Through the open window came the evening chorus of crickets, punctuated by the steady rhythm of hammers as a few dedicated neighbors worked on by lantern light. Determined to get the barn's frame up before full dark, Elias stood and walked to the kitchen door, looking out across the shadowed valley that was now legally theirs. The land stretched away under a rising moon, precious as hope and sure as sunrise. He felt Mattie slip her small hand into his, and his heart filled near to bursting. Guess I needed a little girl like you too, he said softly, squeezing her fingers. She looked up at him, her smile bright in the lamplight. Told you so, she declared with all the satisfaction of an 8-year-old who had known best all along. The sound of hammers echoed across the yard, blending with the cricket song and the quiet murmur of voices inside. Clara sharing a recipe with Nokos, who listened with grave courtesy. All of it wove together into the music of their new life, as natural as breathing and as strong as love. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.